welcome to today's webinar, the preparation or info session for the Getting to Impact series. This is a coaching series that will help you track and report on impact. And the goal of today is really to give you a sense of what to expect, how the group coaching process is going to work, the resources that will be available to you, what to expect in the report itself, and some of the next steps. So I'm going to introduce you to the coaching team. On the screen, you will see Mark Kabaj, and Mark is the president from Here to There Consulting. His current focus is on developing practical ways to understand, plan, and evaluate efforts to address complex issues such as neighborhood renewal, poverty and homelessness, community safety, educational achievement, and health. He has firsthand knowledge of using evaluation and as a policy maker, philanthropist, and activist, and has played a big role in promoting the emerging practice of developmental evaluation in Canada. Mark is the president of the consulting company From Here to There, an associate of Tamarack Institute. And for those of you who didn't know, he was actually the director of Vibrant Communities many years ago in its first iteration when it just began. So we're very glad to have his expert coaching supports on the Getting to Impact series. The other faces that you'll see on the screen, that is myself, Natasha, Allison Homer, Elle Richards, and our newest Cities Reducing Poverty team member, Christina Hedekel. We are all the manager of cities kind of Tamarack coaching supports. So the manager of cities that you normally interact with will be that kind of day-to-day coach that is supporting you in between all of the webinars that Mark is doing for us. And we're going to help you kind of workshop all of the theory and all the practices to put it in, to apply it to what's going on with your roundtable locally. If you go to the next slide, just a bit of an overview of what we're talking about today. Again, we'll give you a little bit of context on this impact reporting. Mark will do a presentation for us on what we're trying to do, how we're supporting you, the approach that we're using, and what the time frame looks like. And I'm probably actually going to touch on more on the time frame. We'll have a question and answer period, and then a few closing announcements. So the intent, as all of you are Cities Reducing Poverty members, you'll know that the four core areas that we're supporting, two of them include helping you progress from startup to sustainability. And as part of that progression, if you look at the collective impact literature, as you start to implement your strategies, evaluation is a big part of that implementation or that building up of sustainability, is being able to track and report on your outcomes. How is the roundtable contributing to the overall poverty reduction going on in our communities? The short-term outcomes, the medium-term outcomes, and those longer-term outcomes like the poverty rates in Simcoe County or in Kawartha, Haliburton, or in Hamilton. So we want to give you some tools because you're managing lots of different partners doing lots of different things in these collective impact roundtables, and it's very hard to be reporting on all of these things and to provide a cohesive story on how all of these little things are adding up to, say, poverty reduction in Hamilton. But that is where we've brought Mark Kabaj on board, and he's going to help us move from tracking and reporting activities to tracking and reporting on what our impacts are in that larger sense. We've also, if you go to the next slide, to help you really do the evaluation, this coaching series will not only help you create an evaluation framework that Mark will go over a little bit later, but you're actually going to do the evaluation reporting. So we're going to help you track, gather and track that data, and you'll be doing it along the way, month to month. And at the end of this, we're going to be working with you on actually completing the report. So by the end of a year to a year and a half, you should have an actual impact report that you can share with your partners, that you can share with the public, that you can share with funders to say, this is how our results or our activities are leading to outcomes for individuals and families, are leading to outcomes for people living in inner city neighborhoods, reductions for people in poverty kind of as a whole in our community. If you go to the next slide. We can pause here and just do a quick round of check-ins. We want to hear from you guys. Just let us know who you are, who you're with, or who your organization is, and really why you want to participate or why you're thinking of participating in the Getting to Impact project. And I will just start at the top of my screen and call on folks as we go. So it looks like, Michelle, you're the first person. Do you care to introduce yourself just really briefly and why you're interested in Getting to Impact? No audio. Okay, so if you write your check-in into the comments box, we'll move on. How about Rachel in Kawartha? Are you there, Rachel? It doesn't look like your audio is connected, so I'm going to move on. And in the meantime, you might want to try checking your audio beside the little microphone function or calling in using the phone number. How about Raymond?
Hi there, thanks, Natasha. So my name is Raymond Funk. I'm the coordinator for a community inclusion network in Southwest New Brunswick. We operate as a convener to support nonprofits and poverty reduction initiatives. Our organization in the last couple of years has gone through a theory of change strategy and plan, and I've only recently come on as coordinator just this past year, and so this is going to hopefully help us take that theory of change, actually throw the roadmap on the table and show us a way forward to kind of actualize this, because our theory of change ended up giving us some pretty big goals. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you're doing perhaps a little strategic learning at the same time as communicating your impact.
That's right. Yeah, and we are also interested in seeing how this can expand, our potential funding, and I'm very interested in if this can give me, as kind of an executive director role, kind of a better roadmap for picking what I should work on. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Raymond.
Yeah.
Tiffany, you're the next on my list. Would you like to introduce yourself? Okay, if you wanted to chat through the chat box, I'll read that when it comes through. How about Dominica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dominica McPherson, and I'm the coordinator of the Guelph and Wellington Task Force for Poverty Elimination. More recently, we're new to Tamarack, so just wanting to gain a better understanding of kind of some of the approaches and supports that are provided, and this seems like a really great way to get a sense of learning, not just from Tamarack, but also more broadly from those of you that are participating. Additionally, we do some impact reporting already, but we are, as I expect similarly to many of you, trying to aim for greater sustainability in terms of our funding, just so that we can do better long-term planning, but also to be able to offer more decent quality work to our employees. So yeah, looking forward to it, and great to be here.
Thanks, Dominica. Connor, are you there? Okay, and I see somebody calling in from a 506 number. Is there somebody on the telephone? All right, I'm just looking at the chat box here, and it looks like we have Michelle Marchand from the County of Simcoe, the local poverty reduction task group, looking at how they can share their efforts with the public and county council. We have Rachel Gillooly from the Haliburton County and City of Kawartha Lakes Poverty Reduction Roundtable, although staff support is just her, 16 hours per week, hoping to be able to partner with somebody else to be able to take their roundtables work to the next level strategically and move the work forwards. Tiffany is here with Vibrant Community Charlotte County, new to the board, and here to gather some general knowledge to support Raymond. And Connor Morrison, who is here listening in on behalf of Colleen Cote with the Saskatoon Poverty Reduction Partnership, who is unable to make it today. Connor is a graduate student and current research assistant for the Community University Institute of Social Research. They are focused currently on poverty reduction strategies in Saskatchewan. So welcome everybody. And I know that several people will be listening to this after as well, as lots of people are now kind of head on the ground, all hands on deck, responding to the community right now. So welcome to everybody who will be listening to this later. Let's move on. And Mark, I think I'm going to hand it over to you now to talk a little bit about how we're going to roll out the coaching process, some of the supports that are available, and yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Natasha, and hi, everyone. Nice to connect, even if it's only virtually. This is the second time we're running this series, which I like because it means we can continually refine and improve and adapt it, and we've done some of that with this series. We had a good series last year that we ran during the year and decided to upgrade it and adapt it again for a new group. So I've really enjoyed that process. As Natasha noted, that I used to be the Executive Director of Vibrant Communities Canada and Vice President of Tamarack from 2001 to 2011. And we actually developed an evolutionary evaluation framework that seemed to put us in good stead for tracking and communicating results across the country, but that was only with 15 groups at the time, not the many in the Vibrant Communities networks. And we only had these beginning innovative collective impact approaches to poverty reduction to begin with. It was still emerging in that phase. We don't have the full body of practice that we have today. So this feels really good to try and catch up with the field in a way and try and answer or address the simple challenge of how do we track and communicate the outcomes of local community poverty reduction efforts for to create momentum for people, to let people know what's going on, to demonstrate this progress, and eventually to inform our strategic thinking about what we might have to change. But I do want to confirm that as we do this, our primary emphasis is on tracking and communicating results, and it may have implications for strategy and planning. But this is not meant to be a strategy and planning guide. It's meant to saying, how do you track and communicate outcomes to others who may not even be involved in your work? And to do that, we do have a framework, which we're going to talk about right away, but the package to support you in this is 6 webinars, each focusing on a different theme, and we'll chat about those shortly. With each webinar and thematic webinar, there's a workbook with some checklists and links to other resources that can help you. And then all the while, there is the VC coaching staff that have both experience in their own right and are connected and can chat with each other, and I'm there to support as well. So think of like a 3-legged stool, each with slightly different learning styles, all organized around the same framework. Well, we got webinars, workbooks, and coaching. See if I can move the screen here. And so let's talk about the approach. And this is really the content of the framework that we're using. And when we talk about this framework, everyone, part of the challenge is how do you develop a framework that, gives you a valid understanding of tracking and communicating change, but also is useful in a crazy variety of contexts. So just imagine all the different storylines on the call today. Different communities, different economies, different dynamics in the service sector, different types of poverty, different theories of change. So what we're trying to do is find a story where at 30,000 feet, this seems to be a framework that is useful for everyone, but absolutely and necessarily needs to be adapted to your local context. So when we go through this framework, it is meant to be a framework that is adapted by you. It's not a cookie cutter recipe. It's impossible to create those for such crazy diversity of contexts and initiatives, but we actually think the framework itself does have some universal truth and relevance for people. So where there's a framework, Then we're going to confirm that in that framework, as we go through the webinar series and the workbook, we're very sensitive to different levels of capacity. We have someone on here who said they're working 16 hours a week, and it looks like the only full-time staff. And we might have other groups like in Calgary that have teams of, I don't know the size of the Calgary group, but 5, 6, even 7 different people. So we have different levels of capacity, and that we know that in all these cases, we're proposing that this is an action learning approach. We only learn by doing. So this framework is a really good start, but developing it and adapting it and feeling comfortable with it at each level of capacity will simply require you to think with your hands. We have to learn it by doing. So we fully anticipate that you will be doing that in this process. And as Natasha noted, we'll have different supports for you to go through each module and learn as you go with each module. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce the framework with the story. And it's a simple story. It's almost a flippant story, but it's a good meme to hold on to as we think about the challenge of communicating progress on a complex issue. And the story begins, a lot of people know the story actually, with a crisis or a situation in St. Lucia in the mid-70s. A British student went to St. Lucia to do some graduate work on conservation work, and particularly on this parrot called Checkins in St. Lucia, which is just in the Caribbean there, and found that when they did a count, there was only 100 of these parrots, the Checkins, left alive. This very unique species only found on that island for some reason, so kind of a ecosystem outlier, and thought, well, hey, in order to address this problem, there's not really going to be a program. We actually have to come up with a policy, a systemic response. So they created a policy framework that had 2 different pillars. Number 1, to create preservations for the parrot and to punish those people who were encroaching on not only the preservation, but actually hunting the parrot in that island, because the parrots had been plentiful for so long and because the population had been quite small until recently. People would actually throw the parrot on a pot on a Sunday night, or kids would use it for target practice. And so they said, well, we got to punish that behavior, and we got to create preservation. So really elegantly simple policy framework. People thought simple enough and probably very easy to pass, except it wasn't. The reason it wouldn't pass is because this parrot wasn't on the public radar. It wasn't in the cultural DNA of the community to give a rip about it. It receded into the background, and so the big first public process to do something with it failed. So what the group did is they actually created a marketing campaign to get people to even become aware of the parrot and its plight, and to try and create identity with the parrot, to get into the narrative and the DNA of the community, create an identity that says this parrot is part of us. And in fact, that's what they did. They said, did you know that we are the only one in the world with this parrot? This is our parrot. When they began to have a referendum on some semblance of independence from Great Britain, they pushed to declare this to be their national bird. They went into schools talking about the parrot, put it on buses, and actually created beauty contests. If you look at your bottom left screen here, there's a comparison of the American bald eagle and the parrot Checkins, and they said, hey, who's got a better looking bird? This diagram is kind of like comparing Salma Hayek and Dick Cheney. Like, there's quite a difference there. And all these games simply to create an identity with the parent. Well, sure enough, identity was on the increase. They could actually track that through bellwether evaluation, through public polling. And they said, we think it's time to actually reintroduce the policy package. But before they did that, they also paid attention to the fact that international ecotourism was on the increase. Remember, this was the 1970s, and that was a fairly new idea back then. And they said, let's actually try and ride the wave of that, exploit that new interest, and then make this an economic incentive as well. So they in fact did that and proposed a new policy package that had the original 2 pillars. Let's preserve the parrot habitat, number 1. Number 2, let's punish people who are encroaching upon that. But number 3, let's create a policy package to incentivize international ecotourism. So they did propose that, and boom, that was adopted. And the moment it was adopted, it created an opening, pressure, and opening niches for all these ecotourism businesses to emerge, and a little ecotourism economy. So that economy actually grew quite quickly the ecotourism economy to such an extent that they actually felt pressure to upgrade the package again, their policy package. They had a roughly right policy framework for ecotourism to begin with, but all these new things happened, things they couldn't have anticipated until they did. And so they actually had to reintroduce a third package. Now, by this time, Jaquette, the identity with Jaquette and its understanding of its value is off the charts, and this society has that paired as a central piece of their own identity. Now, that's an interesting story, but what it does show us is that change happens at different levels. And in order to get the change that happened in St. Lucia, where in 1977 they counted 100 parrots, it went to 750 in 10 years. And by the time it hit 2008, oh, sorry, the PowerPoint changed the number, they have 2,000 to 2,200 parrots, mission level impact. We actually see that they worked on multiple levels. Number one, they began by trying to nudge systems with a policy package. That didn't work, so they went with an identity strategy. Schools, media, public policy makers. They paid attention to what is happening in the landscape, the rise in ecotourism. They therefore introduced a new policy package, which then created pressure for a first round of ecotourism businesses, which then put pressure on for a new policy package, which then created the niche for a second generation of ecotourism businesses, etc. If you look at that, we really see that we have to, in order to get mission level impact, in this case, saving parrots, in our case, reducing poverty, we actually have to be in the business of working across all those scales. Now, so that is number one. We have to work at multiple levels. That if we're managing these strategies, we have to think of some level of orchestration between those. We can't just be busy in those. We actually say, this change at this level creates pressure and change and opportunity for change at that level. So we have to pay attention to this. Our strategy's got to be adaptive. It's iterative. It is comprised of the accumulation of these little outcomes in order to create that big impact over time. And therefore, if we, regardless of whatever theory of change or strategy or logic model we use on the outcome side, in order for people to understand, even ourselves, never mind others, sense of our progress to reducing poverty, we actually have to create our own paradigm. A narrative plus parrots equals paradigm. Now, no one laughs at that joke, but I think it's very funny, and I wasn't the one who came up with it. And it does help us understand at least the distinction between two kinds of results. And you don't have to use, this is your framework, but this is the framework that we're going to use for the entire series. We're going to talk about how do we shift track outcomes as supporting clever niche innovations, cool programs and services, etc. Nudging systems and policy changes, new resource flows, new structures, shifting awareness and ownership, people caring about poverty, thinking about poverty, being willing to act on poverty. And we know that there's also a story to be told about strengthening capacity and navigating the landscape. We actually don't have that in the first 5 modules, but we're going to touch on it a little bit in the 6th module. Because the 5th module, we're going to then say, let's talk about the impact on poverty. And when we talk about impact on poverty, we're going to talk about it at 3 levels. Citywide reductions in poverty, targeted focused, targeted group or area level impact, i.e. in a neighborhood or for a specific group, and then specific poverty reduction outcomes for specific projects and interventions. We think that that's a heck of a good way to frame the poverty reduction story. And when we look back on this framework and had an earlier version of it for the original group that we worked with, we started to look across the country, and we actually said, hey, when you look at what St. John's doing, they've got 10 priorities in 5 neighborhoods. They've got multiple narrative stories. They're working on employment and education, etc. And each one of those has its own parrot story. Sault Ste. Marie is starting with a very profound niche innovation, which is called Harvest Algoma. Think of a niche innovation, and that might be an opening move of a parative story, where eventually they're going to have to talk about nudging systems and awareness, etc. Or if they don't, we should be really clear that their poverty reduction story is only a portion of what it requires to generate impact. Might have programmatic impact and targeted, probably won't have population if it only stays at the level of niche innovation. We know that Dufferin County has got profound work going on right now at another level of imperative, which is shifting awareness and ownership, trying to build momentum for poverty reduction, much like the early days of St. Lucia. And we know that in Kawartha Lakes, they also have multiple imperatives. They have 5 priorities in one town with an emphasis on homelessness, and they might generate more over time. So again, same framework, different applications, but we can see already that that framework adds some intellectual rigor or coherence about how likely are you to impact poverty. Are you working across multiple levels in an iterative way in the hope that these outcomes accumulate over time at 4 levels in order to create impact? Now, that's one framework. We all have different conditions and capabilities, and we have a very rough and roughly right, scrappy version of what capacity looks like. Now, this is imperfect, and so it's not meant to be precise, so don't get worried about the numbers, etc. But we know some people, again, someone on the line said, you know, they've got some real basic capacity, and so they can't handle a huge evaluation set of tools. We thought, well, if that's what you have, we might try and offer some basic monitoring tools that you could deploy that will describe likely impact in a coherent manner across scales. And that would be good. It should be easy to do, but it might only hint at impact, and we'd have to accept that, right? We don't have enough horsepower or to do more than that, but let's do what we can do, and that would be the implication. Level 2, with a bit more staff, we're saying 3 to 4. That might be wrong, but a little bit more than 1 or 2 or volunteers. We would introduce participatory methods that provide at least 360-degree perspective on the impact. And that would give us a stronger evidence of engagement benefits, a stronger evidence of impact, and you would engage people a lot, right, in your stakeholder group. And level 3, we thought if you had, you know, a more fulsome team and are from a larger organization or cluster of organizations, we could probably use multiple indicators and methods that offer diverse perspectives over time, and that would give us more robust data. So we're going to try and think like that, folks, acknowledging you're starting from different places. And again, the webinars and workbooks are a start, but the only way you can do this is to think and learn with your hands. There's no other way of doing it. And we suppose that in the production of your very first report, which Natasha will confirm again in subsequent calls, that creates like a little performance pressure to try and crank out one version of it, knowing that your first version will be good, you'll learn a lot, but probably won't be as good and as easy to do as your 3rd or 4th or 5th version. We need to be relentlessly incremental in building up our capacity to be able to track and communicate both outcomes and impact. Now, that's the setup. We're going to open it up for questions right away, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Natasha, to talk about timelines, and then I guess we're going to open it up for discussion.
All right, thanks, Mark. So as I had mentioned before, these are, we do 1 module per month, and we had it scheduled from May until I believe October this year. However, because we are, because of the pandemic that we're facing, and it's hard to commit to a 6-month series at this point. We're anticipating on shifting the start date back to July. So we'll run the series July through December, still looking at keeping those 3rd Wednesday of the month dates that have been suggested to you, and hopefully that you've held in your calendar, and that we would ask you to register, take a few more months to think about this and then register by the end of June. We're hoping that we'll know a little bit more about what all of our priorities look like by that point. And then once we wrap up in December, we'll start right away. Each module helps you do a little bit more towards your impact report, but then we're really going to work with you January through June next year on completing those impact reports, pulling everything together and getting it down on paper. So that's what the timeline's looking right now. Modules July through December, and then writing the actual impact report January to June next year. So that was a lot of information all at once. Why don't we take some questions now? Any thoughts, questions, comments that you have? You can put it into the chat box, unmute yourself, ask it out loud. Hannah, I think there's another slide if you go to the next. Yeah, there you go. what thoughts come through?
Natasha, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Rachel.
Rachel. So question, with regard to the modules, how long are each of those? And could you talk a little bit about the amount of time for, lack of a better word, homework, if you will, to actually, get my hands dirty?
Sure. Mark, did you want me to speak to that one?
Yeah, why don't you speak to it and I can add.
So each module will do 1 hour webinars or 1 hour communities of practice each month. You have, half an hour to an hour check-in with your managers of cities each month after that initial webinar to give you a little bit of time to go back, process with your team or your group or yourself, and then come back to us with, like, what were you able to do? What do you need to flesh out a little bit more? What are some of the extra resources that we can offer? I would say the homework has varied pretty greatly between teams. Last year, we had some folks who were able to rally teams of 6, and each of them did a few hours each month. And other groups had, 1 or 2 people, and they were doing, I heard each module was taking somewhere between 7 to 8 hours per month. So estimated day of homework in between. But again, it's going to depend on how deep or shallow you take the work, because you could sit there and kind of read through things and sketch out a few ideas and do the bulk of the work afterwards, or you could really dive into all of the materials, go through all of the resources, pull the data as you go. So that's it's really up to you. Did you want to add to that, Mark, at all?
No, I think you're right. It's it's as much or as little as you can handle, and I think maybe, Natasha, tell me if I'm wrong. Let's do this live. I think the idea is the best way to learn is to create sort of an artificial, well, it may not be artificial for some, but for some it would be, just saying, let's produce a report. So let's do as much homework as we need to do to understand the concept and to get the report done. And for some, Natasha, that might be lickety-split easy, right? Mm-hmm. And for others, it might be, this is a bit of work, but it's not so much work for us per se. It's as much work about, I got to do enough work to understand this concept enough to produce a report that we will find useful. So it's not just homework, it's actually leading to the production of something. Am I right in that, Natasha?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the tables last year, there were 1 or 2 that were updating a report. And all they had to do was read through the materials, come to the webinar, talk about it a bit back and forth, and their evaluation person was able to run with it. A lot of the tables, though, felt that it was important to produce a high quality report, and to be able to do that, they needed to have a lot more conversations with the leadership table or with the working groups, and really do the legwork and being able to gather the data from different places and have conversations about, why they're moving in one direction or the other. Does that help answer your question, Rachel?
Yeah, I also, however, really see the value of being able to work with another person. Mm-hmm. I think, and if there's anybody out there, or Natasha, that you think of anybody maybe that I could partner with to do that, I also think that might be a sort of a really kind of invaluable exercise, actually, coming from different regions or different places or points in time. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. If there's anybody else who's thinking of joining this series and would like to connect with another member to be able to walk through the modules together, I think Edmonton and Calgary did that last year, and they found it really helpful as well. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? How is this sitting with you?
Actually, maybe, and just as they're possibly coming in, maybe people could react to even the idea of, which is a basic foundational thing of this whole thing, that tracking and communicating has to be done in a way that's coherent, and simply throwing data out and saying, here's all the things we did and the immediate results, actually doesn't tell the story of how lots of mutually reinforcing things have to happen and make change. So the framework we're using is only one way of doing it. We think it's a coherent way of doing it, but we actually think that the way to communicate change is to say, here's the impact, but here's what it takes to get that impact. Because if we can't do that, then all the time we're going to default to concrete programs and services, which are good because they say, hey, someone's got more food or someone's got better housing, which is critical. But there's not a lot of leverage in just programs alone. We actually have to think and work across multiple levels. And in order to do that, we have to legitimize it with some kind of communication framework that lets people know why that's important and how all these little things knit together to create a bigger thing. So I think that's really a big swing for the fence that we're making on this series, Natasha. I think that's fundamental. The rest of the stuff is just tactics.
Mm-hmm. And Raymond, I see your webcam is on. Did you have a question?
No question, but just a comment. And actually, I really appreciated that point, Mark, that you just made, because there's a few areas. Like I think that communication piece is huge. That is something that our group identified with some of the theory of change work done in the past couple of years, that we need to have a better way of connecting any on the ground programs to our partners, but just communicating who in the world we are and what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think this process will help us discover even for ourselves, like what that actually looks like,
right?
And what we need to do that.
Yeah.
And then another part of it is the way our community inclusion network is set up with the province of New Brunswick is we also do reporting. So we are a flow through funder for initiatives, and so we're also responsible for some reporting back to the province. And I think going through some of the going through this process, I think will help me and our group better communicate the impacts to the province as well. And I know it's something that they're asking for. So on a practical level, I see this fitting in that way as well. So.
And Ray, when you mentioned earlier, you talked about your theory of change. Part of the productive tension, simply to hold and not resolve, is that you may have an inside game around your theory of change, and that may or may not nicely fit with the communication thing, but to say it doesn't have to necessarily, those are two different things. But you might feel some tension later to go, oh, I've got two different organizing frameworks, it's driving me nuts. But I think it's okay to have that, because those are two different functions, okay. Two different things. They don't have to be aligned. It'd be nice if they were symbiotic, but they're two different things. Do you feel that way?
Bad time to ask. I don't really know how I feel, I feel in general right now. Yeah. No, I would say I just don't know. I think the theory of change framework is too big for my britches at the moment, and so yeah, there probably is a level of disconnect of what I feel like we need to be communicating and what we are trying to, or what we say we should. So
yeah. Well, let's just given we chat, let's keep our eye on that as we go through. Just keep our eye on it as a possibility.
Okay.
But the presumption is those are two different things, that it would be nice if they were linked, but they don't have to be linked. So we're not asking anyone to restructure their theory of change. We're just saying when you have to retail all of your data to the outside world, retail it, that this might be a good framework to both for tracking and communicating.
That sounds good. Yeah.
I also see that we have a comment from Michelle just saying good information, looking forward to further discussing with the team and hopefully committing. Will you send emails about the registration? And we will. So following this, we'll send you the link to be able to register for the coaching series, but we will give you a little extra time to actually fill that registration form out and commit. And all of our managers of cities and myself, Elle, Allison, and Christine will also be touching base with you too after this to see kind of where you're at in terms of being able to commit if it's the right fit, and we can talk it through further with each of you. It may also be helpful to have a detailed list of requirements to participate, commitment, and previously completed documents. So yes, we can also send you maybe examples of what people have done in the past and what some of their feedback was. Raymond, you had another question?
So my other question relates, and maybe this also relates to something that Rachel was asking about in terms of like being alone in the process. Mark, would there be, or Natasha, is there value in bringing a partner on? So say you have been working closely with an organization on the ground. Is it valuable to bring one of those folks in on the process if the fit seems right, or is this something that an organization should be doing kind of on its own? Do you know what I'm getting at there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Natasha, go ahead. I have an opinion.
So I've seen it depends on what level they're working at, but I have seen most of the roundtables pull on partners from working groups or from the roundtable at large or from the leadership table, and it's been very helpful. One, in just getting that whoever that extra individual or two are more involved with the bigger picture of what the roundtable is doing. But also to bring that information back to the working group and workshop this, and like what does this actually mean for the housing team, or what does this mean for the education team, or some of your partners might have skills in evaluation. We saw last year a lot of people partner up with their municipalities who have researchers on the team. So those researchers got more involved. They could bring the information about what the roundtable was doing back to the municipality better. And then they were able to work the convener had the historical knowledge and the knowledge of what was going on the ground with the full kind of poverty reduction initiative. And that evaluation person was able to take that information and help work it into their evaluation framework. They're pulling the right type of data, getting the right people involved. So long story short, yes, I would say if you have a partner who you think might participate, I would pull them in. Mark?
Yeah, I agree for those reasons. Ownership, and also the process of testing ideas is great, right? It just makes you think better. I use this framework, and it always gets adapted in another context by talking with people who've got their own worldview. So it's unbelievably enriching. In fact, I would treat the homework not as homework. I know we call it that. I would treat it as a developmental opportunity. We got X amount of time to go through a structured exercise that will generate insight for us about our own work, and will contribute to some practical things about tracking and communicating. I feel it's productive to do it in teams.
We wrote an entire case study at the end of last year about why the team was so important, and everything that the different team members brought to the process of the impact report. So I will refer you there, and maybe Ray, you'll see what some of the individual organizations brought to the table in terms of why they were part of that group and how it really sped up the process. Any final questions or comments? Thoughts? All right. I think we can end a little bit early. Thank you very much, Mark, for walking us through the process, for leading us into this coaching series. Everybody for participating and sending in your helpful thoughts and comments. We have just a few closing announcements. Hannah, if you go to the next slide. So your next steps. This recording will be emailed to you. Feel free to share it around with your leadership table, your working groups, your roundtable, whoever else needs to be part of this decision-making process. Again, like I said, because we are anticipating starting in July, we're going to ask for your registrations by June, and I will send you that registration link for when you're ready. Reach out to one of us, myself, or Elle, or Allison, or Christine with your questions about the Getting to Impact series. But we will be reaching out to you as well if we haven't heard from you in a little while, just to discuss, is this the right fit? Are you feeling good about everything? And, if you're looking for a partner to do this with, another Cities Reducing Poverty member, we can start to pair you up as well. So with that, and also we're doing, in this kind of time of uncertainty, We want to be connecting people with one another, stories, sharing stories of inspiration kind of across our communities, contributing everything that we can. So we're going to have free weekly webinars and podcasts that we would encourage you to join. The link is at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll send that around to you in the follow-up email. And I think that is all of our announcements for today. Thank you for joining. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Stay healthy and safe out there.